Why did the people she protected never even know her name? Staff Sergeant Lucy King existed in the negative space of a battlefield, a phantom with a rifle. Sight start over 6 years, she had ended 37 lives sight start, and the chilling precision of her trade was this. None of her targets ever knew she was there until it was too late. Sight start that was the simple, brutal essence of being a guardian sniper. Sight start she worked unseen, operating from distances measured not in meters, but in kilometers sight start, erasing threats long before they could endanger the people she was guarding. Sight start the victories of others often hinged on her, a solitary figure lying perfectly still in freezing mud or blistering sand, taking impossible shots while the protected focused on their missions. Sight start Lucy preferred the silent contract of that invisibility. Sight start solitude fit her nature like a second skin. Sight start isolation felt like a deep, consuming peace, and the anonymity that excellence brought was a price she paid without a second thought. She carried the weight of her duty alone, a heavy, quiet burden that only she knew the true cost of. It left her with a deep, internal conflict. How do you reconcile the life you save with the one you must take to save it? Sight start for 4 days. She had been shadowing a Navy SEAL fire team, a familiar dance of distance and devotion. Sight start her post was on the snow-drenched, rugged terrain near the Kazarin frontier, staying between 800 meters and 2 kilometers behind them, offering an unseen overwatch as they scouted a suspected weapons trafficking route. Sight start the cold was a living thing, clinging stubbornly around a deadly degrees C. Sight start this was weather designed to kill anyone unprepared in mere hours. Sight start but Lucy, raised in Alaska and hardened by years of field operations, treated the bitter temperature like wind or range, just another variable in the complex equation of a successful shot. Sight start peering through her spotting scope, she watched the SEALs, 4 professionals moving with flawless discipline, pause in a shallow valley. Sight start Lieutenant Dean Maddox led the element, supported by Senior Chief Aaron Pike and Petty Officers Ryan Voss and Poe Alex Ward. Sight start solid operators who knew their craft. Lucy felt a moment of deep, quiet pride in the service she provided them. Sight start but then, a flicker of movement rippled along the eastern ridge line, roughly 1,500 meters from the SEAL's position. Sight start she swung her scope, a knot of pure dread tightening in her gut. Sight start what she saw next froze her blood. Sight start it wasn't coincidence, it was a plan. Sight start a squad, perhaps 20 armed fighters, advanced with the precision that screamed military training, not local insurgents. Sight start they were setting up on the high ground, overlapping fields of fire aimed straight into the valley. Sight start the SEAL team was seconds from stepping into a kill zone. This wasn't the slow, unfolding threat she was trained to interdict from a distance. This was an ambush, set, cocked, and ready to spring. This was the moment where the rules of her world shattered. Sight start she keyed her encrypted radio, the one linking her to both the SEALs and the Tactical Operations Center. Sight start SEAL 1 Overwatch. Her voice was clipped. Hostiles establishing ambush positions on your East Ridge bearing 85. Approximately 20 fighters with heavy weapons. Recommend immediate relocation. Maddox's voice came back tense. Sight start Overwatch confirm hostile intent. We're in a gray zone for engagement rules. Sight start through her optics, Lucy saw the intent couldn't be clearer. Machine guns mounting, RPG teams kneeling for angles, marksmen setting scopes on raised points. Sight start SEAL 1, they're forming an L-shaped ambush. You're the kill zone. Sight start she detailed the threat. Heavy machine guns, multiple RPG teams, 3 confirmed marksmen. Sight start, this is coordinated. Move now. Sight start but before Maddox could respond, the silence was violently split. Sight start the first shot landed and Voss twisted, dropping as his leg buckled. Fatal but bad enough to trap them. Sight start the ambush had begun. Sight start machine gun bursts shredded the valley. Sight start RPG hissed through the icy air. Sight start the SEAL team dove for what little cover the terrain offered, which was almost none. Lucy felt a deep surge of anxiety mixed with a grim determination. Sight Starchy had perhaps 10 minutes, maybe less, before the situation became irreversible. Sight Start the distance to the enemy was roughly 2,000 meters from her position. Sight Start this was extreme range even in perfect conditions, and these were anything but. Sight Start wind gusted in unpredictable bursts. The brutal cold was skewing her ballistics, and she was shooting uphill, each factor making the calculations uglier. Sight Start still, math was math, and 6 years of practice meant turning bad variables into hits. Sight Starchy swung from the spotting scope to her weapon, the Mk13 Mod 7, the .300 Winchester Magnum that had been with her through 73 missions. Sight Start the rifle rose as if by habit, muscle memory guiding every precise movement. Sight Starchy found the machine gunner pinning the seals and settled him into her crosshairs. A gust hit. Sight Start Lucy compensated, shifting her hold by feel as much as by calculation. Sight Starchy waited for the natural respiratory pause, the tiny, perfect window where everything is still, and eased the trigger in a slow, deliberate press. Sight Start the Mk13 barked. Sight Start the machine gunner snapped back, vanished. Sight Start threat one down. Sight Start working the bolt, she picked out an RPG gunner. Sight Start he thought the shot was inevitable, he never finished it. Sight Start Lucy's second round caught him center mass, sending him and his launcher tumbling down the slope. Sight Start Seal 1, Overwatch engaging hostile positions at extreme range, she transmitted, her voice steady. Sight Start, primary MG and 1 RPG team neutralized, but you're still taking fire from multiple sectors. Can you displace? Maddox's return was tight. Sight Start, negative, Overwatch. Voss is down with a leg wound. We're taking sustained fire from at least 3 positions, and we don't have clear routes out of this kill zone. Sight Start his transmission cut off under another burst of gunfire. Sight Start Lucy saw the deep trouble they were in. Sight Start Voss couldn't move. Sight Start the rest of the team was huddled, burning ammo, trying to suppress an enemy with the advantage of position and numbers. This was the quiet, terrifying moment of internal reckoning. Sight Start doctrine dictated a Guardian sniper stays put, keep separation, keep engaging at standoff. Sight Start call for support. Sight Start but the nearest quick reaction force was 45 minutes away by helicopter, and air assets were grounded by worsening weather. Sight Start the SEALs didn't have 45 minutes. Sight Start Lucy didn't hesitate. Sight Start the rule book became irrelevant the moment their position turned into a kill zone. She felt a profound, moral conviction that transcended any regulation. Her primary mission was protecting them, and the method was simply what worked. Sight Starchy dismantled her hide with practiced speed, shouldered the Mk13, and brought her M4 up. Sight Start the shorter rifle was better for closing and fighting. Sight Start the plan was simple, reckless, and necessary. Close distance, combine precision shooting with aggressive movement, and break the ambush from a range where her skill and tactical mobility met. Sight Start Seal 1, I'm moving to you, she keyed the radio. Sight Start give me 8 minutes and I'll be close enough to provide direct fire support. Keep your heads down and stay alive. A beat of shocked silence. Then Maddox's voice, stunned. Sight Start Overwatch. Guardian snipers don't close distance. You're supposed to maintain separation and engage from distance. Sight Start, Lieutenant, with respect, Lucy replied, her voice firm. The rule book became irrelevant the moment their position turned into a kill zone. Your team's about to be overrun, and I'm the only asset close enough to do anything about it. I'm moving now. Over. Watch your sectors. Sight Starchy moved through the Velkar Ridge terrain with a controlled aggression that balanced speed against the real risk of injury. Sight Start 800 meters of snow, rocks, and frozen streams that could snap an ankle in a single misstep. Under normal conditions, it was a 30-minute safe cross. Sight Start Lucy did it in 7. Sight Starchy used every fold of the ground for concealment, slipping through draws and behind ridge lines, staying in dead ground where the hostile force couldn't see her approach. Sight Start the temperature was brutal, dropping below degrees C, but adrenaline kept her focused and warm. Sight Start, her M4 carbine was ready, spare magazines staged, grenades queued. Sight Start at 300 meters from the nearest hostile position, she could finally make out the whole ambush. Sight Start, a professional setup, 3 primary firing positions in an L shape around the valley, with additional fighters handling security and ammunition resupply. Sight Start, but they had made one critical mistake. Every set of eyes faced the valley where the SEALs were pinned. Sight Start, no, one watched the rear approaches. Why would anyone dare attack a 20-man force from behind in the middle of a blizzard? Sight Start Lucy King was about to answer that question. Sight Start, she closed from the northwest, the vector they weren't checking. First targets were 2 fighters manning the rear security. Sight Start, they were cold, tired, and careless. Went down to suppressed fire before they even realized someone was behind them. Sight Start Lucy moved past their bodies and acquired the next target, a machine gun 20 meters ahead, worked by 3 fighters pinning the SEALs. Sight Start, she closed to within 15 meters and engaged, dropping all 3 with controlled pairs, 2 center mass rounds each to confirm the hits. Sight Start, the machine gun fell silent. Sight Start, confusion rippled through the enemy lines. Sight Start fighters moved to investigate the silence, and Lucy punished that choice. Sight Start firing from behind rocks, her M4 found targets with mechanical precision. Sight Start 4, more fighters went down before the rest realized they were under attack from their rear. Sight Start, the ambush began to disintegrate into chaos. Sight Start, but now Lucy was exposed and taking return fire. Sight Start rounds cracked past her head, sparking off stone. Sight Start, she moved laterally, using smoke and terrain to reposition before concentrated fire could bracket her. That's when Maddox's voice came over the radio, strained but functional. Sight Start, unknown friendly, this is SEAL 1. Identify yourself. Sight Start Lucy reloaded on the move, keeping her tone clipped and steady. Sight Start, identify yourself and your position. You're disrupting enemy fire, but we can't support you unless we know where you are. Lucy keyed her radio. Sight Start SEAL 1, this is Overwatch. I'm roughly 200 meters northwest of your location, engaging the hostile element from their rear. Sight Start, she quantified the impact. I've knocked out their primary MG and reduced their effective strength by about 1/3, but I'm taking fire from multiple sectors now. A pause, then Maddox's voice somewhere between disbelief and relief. Sight Start Overwatch, you're the Guardian sniper. I thought you operated from distance. Normally I do, Lieutenant, Lucy replied simply. Sight Start, today I'm improvising. Can you put suppressive fire on bearing 320 from your position? I've got enemy fighters trying to regroup that way and I could use the help. Sight Start, copy. Stand by for support fire. Sight Start, the SEALs answered with surgical precision. Sight Start, their rounds forced the enemy to find cover, breaking their attempts to mass against her. Sight Start, with the pressure eased, Lucy shifted again, finding new angles on the remaining threats. Sight Start, she chewed through the remaining fighters methodically. An RPG gunner trying to find a lane, 2 riflemen attempting to flank the SEAL element. Sight Start, another machine gunner. Sight Start, each engagement was quick and ruthless. See the threat, engage with controlled fire, confirm the hit, move. Sight Start, under pressure from 2 directions, the hostile formation began to collapse. Sight Start, the professional ambush unraveled into frantic withdrawal or death. Sight Start, some fighters tried to fall back across the open ground. Sight Start Lucy could watch and interdict with ease. Sight Start, she slung the MK-13 back on when distance called for it. Sight Start, the precision rifle reminded everyone why she'd carried it for 6 years. Sight Start, fighters who assumed distance was safety found out it wasn't. Sight Start, after 20 minutes of sustained combat, the noise died down. Sight Start only, the wind howled across Velkar Ridge. Sight Start, the hostile force was neutralized or driven off. Lucy ran a careful scan for lingering threats, then keyed her radio. Sight Start SEAL 1 Overwatch. Hostile force neutralized or dispersed. Your position is secure. I'm moving to you to assist with casualty care. Sight Start, she closed to the SEAL position cautiously, announcing her approach and waiting for verification before stepping into view. Sight start when she finally drew near and stripped back her white winter hood. All four seals stared. Sight start Lucy pulled the hood free. Auburn hair braided tight against her skull, gray-green eyes that missed nothing, and a thin scar over her left brow. Sight start she moved straight to Ryan Voss, whose leg was crudely bandaged. Sight start let me see that wound, she said, kneeling and opening her trauma kit. Sight start her hands worked with practiced efficiency, checking the dressing, confirming the bullet passed through muscle, administering pain medication and securing a better dressing. Voss watched in stunned fascination. Sight start, ma'am, who exactly are you? He asked. Sight start, Staff Sergeant Lucy King, Guardian Sniper Division, she answered plainly. Sight start, I've been providing overwatch for your element for the past 4 days. Maddox, who'd been scanning the horizon, turned toward her. Sight start, 4 days. We've been running this op solo. No mention of Guardian support in our briefing. Sight start, that's how Guardian operations work, Lieutenant, Lucy replied evenly. Sight start, you're not supposed to know we're there. We shadow special operations teams from distance, neutralize threats before they form, provide early warnings, and make sure you can stay focused on your objectives without worrying about what's outside your perimeter. She stood. Sight start, usually, we maintain total separation. You're not meant to even know we exist. This time was different. Pike, a 20-year SEAL veteran, spoke up. Sight start, ma'am, I've worked with Overwatch snipers from every branch. What you pulled off wasn't Overwatch. That was direct action, close quarters against a force twice our size. Sight start, Maddox asked the question they were all wondering. How many did you take down yourself? Sight start, 16 confirmed. Maybe 3 more I couldn't verify in the chaos, Lucy said matter-of-factly without pride or false modesty. Sight start, the situation demanded deviation from standard Guardian protocols. Ward, the youngest of the team, couldn't help but voice his awe. Sight start, you were tracking us for 4 days and we had no clue. Sight start, that's the job, Lucy said simply. Sight start, Guardian snipers work alone, maintain perfect concealment, and hit threats before anyone knows they exist. You've probably had Guardian Overwatch on other missions without ever realizing it. She felt the internal struggle of revealing her existence, the necessary sacrifice of her anonymity to save their lives, but she did not regret the choice. The rule book was less important than the lives standing before her. Sight start, before they could say more, the weather turned violent. Sight start, the wind roared, shoving them sideways. Sight start, the air temperature dropped sharply and the sky darkened. Away veterans instantly recognized a storm was inbound. Sight start, Lucy felt it first, her instincts sharpened by years in hostile terrain. Sight start, we need shelter now, she commanded. Sight start, major storm systems closing in. 30 minutes, maybe less. Staying in this valley is suicide. Maddox didn't question her. Sight start, after what she'd done, she'd earned their implicit trust. Sight start, there's a cave system about 2 clicks north, Lucy said. Spotted it 2 days ago while scouting. Sight start, it'll give us cover from wind and cold, concealment from recon, and solid defense if needed. Sight start, Voss would hurt, but he'd move. Sight start, they rotated his gear, lightened his load, and he'd make it with help. Sight start, they set out immediately, Lucy taking points since she knew the terrain best. Sight start, Pike supported Voss, who limped forward with quiet determination, while Maddox and Ward guarded their flanks. Sight start, the storm slammed them before they reached the caves, turning the landscape into a white hell in minutes. Sight start, visibility fell to under 20 meters. Sight start, the temperature plunged toward degrees C, and wind screamed hard enough to make standing a fight. Sight start, Lucy kept them moving anyway, navigating by GPS and hard-earned terrain memory through conditions that would have left most people hopelessly lost. Sight start, they reached the cave system just as the storm hit full fury. Sight start, the caverns weren't large, but they cut deep enough into the mountain to block wind and retain heat. Sight start, Lucy guided them to the best chamber, 15 meters deep with a narrow, easily defended entrance and good thermal properties. Sight start, as they set up a defensive posture and tried to warm themselves, the SEALs started asking about her and the Guardian program. Sight start, she answered what was safe within classification. The The selection, the training, the psychological prep for long solo deployments. How long you been doing Guardian Ops? Site Start Voss asked, the pain meds making him looser. Site Start, 6 years, 73 missions, Lucy said. Site Start, most go exactly as planned. I sit at distance, remove threats before the team sees them, and everyone comes home without knowing I existed. Today was exceptional. Exceptional how? Site Start, Maddox demanded. Site Start, the ambush had been set up with tactical competence that screamed professional training. Site Start, the hostile force had anticipated your movement and prepared accordingly. Standard Guardian overwatch from 2 kilometers wouldn't have saved you. The engagement would have ended before I could change it. So I closed and fought them directly. You done that before? Shift from overwatch to close quarters? Site Start, Pike asked. Lucy was quiet a beat, remembering the deep anxiety and determination of that first time. Site Start, once in Syria 3 years ago, she confessed. Site Start, a Delta element walked into a complex ambush. Standard protocols weren't enough, so I closed to 50 meters, struck from the flank while Delta fought from position. We removed 37 hostiles between us with 0 American casualties. Pike exhaled a low whistle. Site Start, that's not doctrine, he said. Site Start, yeah, it's adaptation to necessity, Lucy corrected. Site Start, Guardian snipers train for extreme range precision, but we also train close quarters because sometimes distance isn't an option. Sometimes the only way to save a team is to join the fight. Site Start, the storm howled outside for 6 hours. Site Start, they rotated watches, shared rations, and kept warm enough to be uncomfortable instead of dead. Site Start, a small mercy. Site Start, as the storm finally began to break that evening, Maddox sat beside Lucy during her rest. Site Start, King, I need to ask something, he said quietly. Site Start, you saved our lives today, pulled us out of an ambush we never saw, then kept us alive through a storm that would have killed us in that valley. Why do you do it? Operate alone for days, never take credit, no recognition. Site Start, Lucy sat in silence for a long time, her gaze fixed on the cave entrance where the storm still raged, its fury fatting. This was the heart of her purpose, the core of her profound sacrifice. Site Start, my father was a Marine officer, she said quietly. Site Start, Iraq 2004. Rifle Company, heavy combat. Site Start, he was smart, tactical, and cared about his Marines. Site Start, but one day his patrol walked into an ambush. Site Start, she paused, her voice even but edged with old, deep pain. Site Start, the sniper they never saw killed him and 3 others before they could react. Site Start, the memory was still sharp years later. Site Start, I was 16. Spent the next few years angry at the war, the insurgents, the universe for taking him. She exhaled slowly. Site Start, when I joined the army and made it through sniper school, I realized what I really wanted, to stop that from happening to other families. To be the unseen guardian who removes the threat before it takes someone's dad, someone's brother, someone's kid. Maddox nodded quietly, a profound understanding passing between them. Site Start, your father would be proud of what you do. Lucy gave a faint, tired smile, a mix of hope and weariness. Site Start, maybe. Or maybe he'd think I'm insane for spending 6 years lying in frozen mud making shots most people call impossible. But it's not about what he'd think, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Site Start, it's about making sure some other 16-year-old doesn't lose a parent to an enemy they never saw coming. Site Start, by 2100 hours, the storm broke completely. Site Start, the world outside was buried under new snow, but calm enough to move. Site Start, the team prepped for extraction, 23 kilometers of rough ground between them and the pickup zone. Site Start, hard even without a wounded man. Site Start, Lucy slid seamlessly back into her Overwatch role. Site Start, this time, she stayed within visual and comms range, alternating between leading point and covering their rear. Site Start, she read the land for safer paths, catching threats before the team stumbled onto them. Site Start, Weiss, she spotted enemy patrols sweeping for the Americans who'd wrecked their ambush. Site Start, one group, she vetoed the SEALs around entirely. Site Start, the other couldn't be avoided. Sight Start Lucy quietly dropped a three-man observation post from 600 meters with three fast, precise shots. Sight Start the SEALs never heard. Sight Start the extraction came at 6:30 sharp. Sight Start Blackhawks thundered low and fast into a sheltered valley. Sight Start Lucy climbed aboard last, taking her usual spot by the door, keeping eyes on the world until they were clear of hostile ground. Sight Start as the birds lifted from the frozen wilderness, relief mingled with that faint melancholy that always followed a mission. Sight Start the shift from solitude to civilization never came easy. Maddox moved over once they were airborne. "King, I need to tell you something," he said. "Sight Start. I'm filing the after-action report and I'm including what you did. You deserve recognition." Lucy shook her head instantly, a sudden, fierce determination in her eyes. "Sight Start, Lieutenant, if you put details about Guardian sniper operations and my specific actions in that report, you'll compromise me and the whole program," she said flatly. "Sight Start, operational security is the backbone of what we do. Document Guardian snipers doing direct action and every hostile force will start hunting for us. That makes future missions far more dangerous and far less effective." "So what goes in the report?" Sight Start Maddox asked, a sense of anxious respect in his voice. "Sight Start, that your element ran into a prepared ambush by roughly 20 personnel with heavy weapons," Lucy instructed. "Sight Start, that you defended your position, eliminated the hostile force through superior tactics and firepower, displaced into a shelter as weather deteriorated, and were extracted on schedule with one minor casualty." Her voice was steady. "Sight Start, all true. It's not the whole story, but it's enough truth to meet reporting requirements while preserving the security of classified programs." Her tone eased. "Sight Start, Lieutenant, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there are 16 hostile fighters who won't threaten American forces again, and 4 SEALs going home to their families. That's the only recognition that matters to me." Sight Start 3 days later, the debrief was held at Langston Base in Germany. Sight Start Lucy sat across a conference table from Colonel Dana Holt, who led the Special Operations Task Force, and Marcus Renner, the civilian representative for the Guardian Sniper Division. Holt opened the session. "Sight Start, I've reviewed classified reports from multiple sources, including Guardian documentation and Lieutenant Maddox's after-action. Note, he made no explicit mention of your role, even though his team knows what happened. She followed the protocols for classified programs." Renner leaned forward. "Sight Start, let's lay out what happened in Velka Ridge. You were performing standard Guardian overwatch at a distance when the SEAL element walked into a prepared ambush. You elected to abandon standard separation, close to contact, and engage in direct close-quarters combat against a numerically superior force." "Sight Start, the tactical situation required adaptation," Lucy replied, her determination unshakable. "Sight Start, standard Guardian doctrine, wouldn't have sufficed. The team would have been overrun before long-range precision fire could change the outcome. I assessed the fight and determined closing to their flank was the only viable option to prevent American casualties." Holt listened closely. "Sight Start, you made the correct decision. That's not in question. What we need to determine is whether this is a pattern." Sight Start Renner observed. "This is the second time in your career you've shifted from traditional Guardian overwatch to direct action. The first was in Syria 3 years ago. Similar circumstances." "Sight Start, yes, ma'am," Lucy acknowledged. "Sight Start, both incidents involved prepared ambushes by professionally trained enemy forces where extreme range engagement alone wouldn't protect the teams I was assigned to guard. I adapted when conditions demanded it." Renner's tone remained neutral. "Sight Start, we'll codify that adaptation. When conditions justify it, Guardian operators will be authorized and trained to transition from overwatch to direct action at close quarters." Lucy felt a profound sense of vindication for the difficult choice she had made. "I've established I'll adapt tactics based on the situation and the capabilities I bring," she said simply. "Sight Start, my primary mission is protecting American forces. The methods depend on circumstances." Sight Start Holt and Renner exchanged a brief look, a clear sign they had discussed this beforehand. "We're not disciplining you," Holt said, a faint, proud smile crossing her face. "Sight Start, your actions saved 4 American lives and eliminated a significant hostile force. Exactly what the Guardian Sniper Division is meant to do. However, we need to address the implications of your tactical adaptations." Marcus Renner explained the new path. "Sight Start, we're creating a new role within the division. Advanced Guardian operators trained and authorized to shift between long-range overwatch and direct action engagement as the situation demands. You'll be the first formally assigned to that billet, and you'll help craft the training and protocols for those who follow." Sight Start, Colonel Holt added, "We're also promoting you to Sergeant First Class, effective immediately, and assigning you to the Guardian Sniper Training Program as lead instructor for advanced operations. Sight Start, you'll spend the next 6 months teaching the next generation both classic long-range techniques and the tactical flexibility to adapt when doctrine doesn't fit the fight." Sight Start, Lucy nodded, accepting the promotion and the assignment, even though she privately preferred field work to classroom duty. Sight Start, her 6 years and 73 missions mattered more as hands-on experience that needed passing on to operators who would watch over warriors from the shadows. Sight Start, over the following months, Lucy trained a dozen new Guardian snipers in advanced operations, precision marksmanship, and long-range engagement. Sight Start, yes, but also close quarters fighting, tactical movement, and most importantly, the mental flexibility to recognize when to deviate from standard protocol. Sight Start, the program, evolved with her input and reports from other Guardian operators who'd faced similar choices. Trigger points for transition from Overwatch to direct action, modified equipment loadouts to support dual modes, and enhanced training ensured operators could function across the full spectrum of Guardian missions. This felt like the true, quiet recognition of her sacrifice. Sight Start, 3 years after the Velka Ridge engagement, Commander Dean Maddox, now promoted and leading a larger SEAL element, ran into stiff resistance in northern Canada. As his team maneuvered under fire, his radio crackled with a familiar transmission. "Sight Start, SEAL Actual Overwatch. I have eyes on your position and the hostile force. 22 personnel with crew-served weapons forming an L-shaped ambush. Recommend immediate displacement to bearing 270. I'll provide covering fire." Maddox keyed back with a half-smile despite the tense situation. "Sight Start, moving on your mark, and whoever you are, thanks for being there." Sight Start, he never learned if the voice belonged to Lucy or one of the 12 operators she'd trained. Sight Start, the call sign was deliberately neutral, preserving the operational security that made Guardian operations effective. Sight Start, as his team displaced under precision, covering fire from distances they couldn't even see. Maddox knew somewhere out there a Guardian was watching. Sight Start, Lucy King kept working in the field for another 7 years, building a record that eventually reached 198 confirmed kills across 86 Guardian operations. Sight Start, she trained 37 advanced operators who went on to protect special operations teams across 6 combat zones. Sight Start, she sought no recognition, gave no interviews, never posed for official photos. Sight Start, her service remained classified, so most people would never know the Guardian snipers existed. Sight Start, in secure briefing rooms across Special Operations Commands, senior officers knew about the Guardian Sniper Division and about the advanced operators capable of moving seamlessly between long-range precision and close-quarters combat. Sight Start, they all knew the story of that day at Velka Ridge when a Guardian sniper named Lucy King broke protocol, charged into an ambush, and saved 4 American lives through a mix of impossible marksmanship and fearless aggression. Sight Start, they couldn't speak of it publicly, but they never forgot. Sight Start, years later, while instructing a new class of Guardian candidates, Lucy was asked what kept her going through the isolation, the danger, and the crushing weight of carrying others, lives on her shoulders, completely alone. Her answer never changed: a poignant reflection on her journey from broken teenager to resolute operative. Cite start. My father died because of a sniper he never saw from a position he couldn't find. Cite start. Spent my entire career making sure that doesn't happen to other families. Cite start. Whether I'm shooting from 2 kilometers out or fighting at 50 meters doesn't matter. Cite start. What matters is that American warriors make it home alive. Cite start. That had always been her mission, and it was the only one that ever mattered. Cite start. The Guardian Division continued to evolve, combining its original long-range Overwatch roots with the advanced doctrines Lucy helped shape, giving operators the tactical freedom to adapt when conditions demanded it. Cite start. Training got sharper, equipment got smarter, and the selection process grew even more demanding. Cite start. But the core truth remained untouched. Cite start. American warriors operating in hostile territory deserve unseen protection from threats they'll never notice. Cite start. And Guardian snipers will always provide it. Cite start. Whether from impossible distance or within the fight itself. Cite start. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. Cite start. It simply does what wolves do when the flock is in danger. Cite start. Sometimes it watches from far ridges. Cite start. Sometimes it walks through the storm with a rifle in hand. Cite start. Sometimes it stands shoulder to shoulder with the flock, adapting, fighting, doing whatever's needed to bring them home. Cite start. Because in the end, it's not about medals, credit, or headlines. Cite start. It's about knowing that somewhere out there, American warriors are alive because someone in the shadows made the impossible possible. Sometimes, true strength doesn't speak. It simply walks out of the darkness and into the fight. Why did the silence of the training room feel colder than the blizzard she had just left? The promotion to Sergeant First Class and the new billet as lead instructor for the Advanced Guardian program brought Lucy King off the mountain and into a sterile underground facility in Virginia. For 6 years, her world had been wind, rock, the smell of cordite, and the perfect, terrifying silence before a shot. Now her reality was fluorescent lights, soundproofing, and the heavy presence of other people. She felt a profound, almost paralyzing sense of dislocation. She was no longer invisible. She was watched, studied, and expected to articulate the instinct that had saved those SEALs. It was the deepest form of internal conflict she had yet faced. How do you teach someone else to break a rule they haven't learned yet? How do you formalize necessary anarchy? The trainees were the best of the best, hand-picked from Army, Marine, and Air Force sniper schools, all with exceptional records but none with the unique psychological profile required for the Guardian mission. They saw her, the legend of Velkar Ridge, the woman who walked out of the storm with a rifle. They treated her with a mix of awe and skepticism, their expressions asking the unspoken question, did she really fight 20 men, alone in a blizzard? Lucy felt their judgment like a physical weight, making her feel exposed and vulnerable in a way the battlefield never had. She missed the simple honesty of the field, where the only thing that mattered was the bullet's flight and the truth of the wind. She felt profoundly ignored in this new role, not by malice, but by the fact that they couldn't possibly understand the solitude that was her strength. Her first lecture was about the concept of adaptive morality, the moment where duty to the mission transcends adherence to doctrine. She described the ambush, the seconds ticking down, the sheer impossibility of the shot from 2 kilometers and the calculated risk of closing to 300 meters. She spoke in her natural narrator-style tone, short, deliberate sentences, punctuated by emotional pauses. The enemy had a plan, she said, her voice low. The doctrine we were given was for their plan. When I stepped out of the rule book, I created my own plan. That's what being an advanced guardian is. It's not just a rifle. It's an ethical choice in a fraction of a second. She emphasized the deep, anxious cost of that choice. The lives she saved became the focus, but she never let them forget the inherent, brutal cost of the lives she had to take to save them. One trainee, a Marine Corps veteran named Captain Marcus Hayes, was particularly vocal in his skepticism. Sergeant First Class, with respect, he challenged. Your report states you neutralized 16 targets in the close quarters fight. We train for surgical precision. That kind of deviation increases collateral damage risk exponentially. Lucy looked him in the eye, her gaze steady. It was a kill zone, Captain. The collateral damage was 4 American lives about to be lost. My priority wasn't surgical precision on the hostile force. It was total security for the element I was protecting. The moral choice isn't about the round you fire. It's about the lives your failure costs. She added, quietly, thoughtfully, the silence of the moral high ground is easy to keep when you're not the one responsible for the dead men in the valley. That quiet reflection silenced the room more effectively than any reprimand. The training cycle was grueling. Lucy pushed them past their physical and mental limits, teaching them to pack the full weight of the Guardian's responsibility into every action. They learned how to build a hide that could survive a sudden storm, how to calculate ballistics across 2 kilometers, and how to transition to an M4 in under 3 seconds. She taught them to read the body language of the earth, how to become truly, utterly invisible, an essential skill that was hard to translate, yet central to her own silent resilience. The deeper they got into the course, the more they realized she wasn't teaching them to shoot. She was teaching them to wait, to watch, and to carry the lonely, invisible burden of being the final line of defense. The cost of their job was not measured in physical strain, but in the psychological isolation they had to embrace. Then a new element was introduced into the training schedule, a high-level briefing from the task force commander, Colonel Holt. The atmosphere in the briefing room was palpably tense, heavy with the sense of a new, complex threat. Holt projected a single image onto the screen, a stylized, abstract symbol of intertwined gears. "We are facing an organization that is evolving," Holt began. "They are no longer local insurgent groups. They are funded, trained, and globally coordinated. Every ambush we've seen in the last 2 years, from Velkar Ridge to the recent attack in the Canadian sector, bears the same signature: L-shaped kill zones, overlapping fire, highly professional execution. The common denominator is a single individual," Holt continued, introducing the mystery and suspense that Lucy instantly recognized as a threat worthy of her new program. "He is known only by the designation, the architect, a ghost. We believe he is a former military officer from a foreign power who now runs a global mercenary network, training their clients to hunt Western Special Operations Forces. He doesn't pull a trigger, he designs the battlefield. He orchestrated the Velkar Ridge attack." Lucy felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her actions that day had defeated his plan, but they hadn't defeated him. The suspense deepened as Holt outlined the architect's tactical genius. His greatest strength was his elusiveness. He never stays in one place. He travels between remote, denied areas, building training camps and command structures. Our intelligence has placed him, tentatively, in the high mountains of the Hindu Kush, an area we cannot penetrate with conventional forces, and certainly not with air assets. It's too denied, too high, too volatile. Any approach would compromise the mission and risk an international incident. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, landing finally on Lucy. "This is where the Advanced Guardian program comes in," Holt stated. "We need eyes on the architect. We need confirmation of his location, confirmation of his identity, and a clean window for a surgical strike by a specialized direct action unit. This requires an Overwatch operation so deep, so covert, and so long-term that only one person can execute it. One who can handle the total isolation, the impossible terrain, and who has the documented willingness to transition to direct action if the architect moves or if their extraction element is compromised." The tension in the room was electric. The trainees looked excited, anxious. Lucy remained perfectly still, her heart pounding a steady, professional beat. The emotional weight of the assignment settled immediately on Lucy. It was the ultimate test of her silence and resilience. The mission, codenamed Operation Watchman, required a solo insertion into a zone where survival itself was an achievement, and where discovery meant guaranteed death and international crisis. She would be completely alone, operating in the upper extreme of her weapon's range, potentially weeks away from any friendly support. She felt a familiar, almost comforting surge of determination mixed with the gnawing anxiety of the unknown. She was finally back where she belonged, in the solitude of the essential mission, but the stakes were impossibly high. The next few weeks were devoted to advanced mission prep, focused solely on the Hindu Kush AO. Lucy and Hayes, the skeptical but brilliant Marine captain, worked side by side, developing the loadouts and insertion strategy. Hayes had come to respect her quiet command, her ability to break down the impossible into manageable physics problems. He noticed the soft moral reflection she brought to every decision, always calculating the least amount of force required to achieve the highest certainty of success. One afternoon, reviewing the ballistic data for the 3.8-kilometer range, Hayes looked up. "Sergeant First Class, you didn't have to take the promotion and the teaching gig. You could have stayed in the shadows. Why did you take the spotlight, even a small one?" Lucy took a moment, tapping her pen against the contour map. "It's not the spotlight, Captain," she said, her voice thoughtful. "It's the protection. Someone taught me how to save lives, and now I have to teach the next generation of protectors. The problem isn't the distance on the battlefield. It's the distance between knowledge and instinct. If I don't bridge that, the next team that walks into the architect's trap won't have a chance." She packed a profound sense of sacrifice into those simple words. "My job isn't to kill him. My job is to make sure he never kills another American warrior." The final moments before the mission were the hardest. Lucy stood by the cargo ramp of the specialized high-altitude aircraft, looking down at the team of trainees who had come to see her off. They wouldn't know the exact mission, but they knew it was monumental. She could see the hope in their eyes, the desperate wish that she would succeed. She felt the heavy burden of their faith, but it was a burden she was ready to carry. The airlock door began to close, sealing her inside the cavernous hull. She was back in the familiar solitude of her world, alone again. She turned her focus to the mountain, the coming isolation, the perfect, terrifying math of the shot. But there was something she hadn't told anyone at the facility. Not yet. She was convinced the architect hadn't just designed the ambush at Velkar Ridge. She believed he had been there, watching her break his system. And this time, he would be waiting. 3. Why did she feel the ghost of the architect already watching her descent? The specialized high-altitude aircraft, a whisper-quiet repurposed transport, dropped Lucy into the cold, hostile embrace of the Hindu Kush. She didn't parachute. She used an oxygen-fed low-altitude halo jump, exiting at 30,000 feet and gliding for 20 minutes before a near-silent landing on a snow-swept ridgeline at 18,000 feet. The air was thin, brutal, and filled with a crystalline silence that magnified every crunch of her specialized mountaineering boots. The altitude was an immediate crushing enemy, forcing her into a slow, deliberate packing that contradicted the urgency of her mission. She was anxious, not about the danger but about the clock. She had a limited window of oxygen, energy, and rations to reach her designated observation post-op. Every breath was a conscious, painful effort. This deep, physical exertion was overlaid with the subtle, insidious feeling that she was not just entering enemy territory, but entering a trap. Her destination was a point on the mountain spine known as the Crow's Nest. It sat 3.5 kilometers from the suspected forward operating base of the architect, a distance that would put her well outside the range of typical counter-sniper fire, but within the extreme, almost mythical envelope of her Mk13 Mod 7 rifle and its specialized ammunition. The climb was a relentless 2-day ascent, a vertical nightmare of blue ice, sheer rock faces, and unpredictable avalanches. Lucy moved like a machine, her movements stripped down to the minimum necessary for survival. Her gear weighed 80 pounds, meticulously organized for survival, overwatch, and combat. Her internal conflict wasn't about the climb. It was about the purpose of the climb, to observe and wait. The guardian in her was focused on the hunt. The instructor in her knew she had to prioritize patience. On the second day, at 19,000 feet, the mountain itself became actively dangerous. She was traversing a narrow, corniced ridge when she spotted the first sign that this was not a simple clandestine observation mission. A barely visible tripwire, woven from fine synthetic thread, stretched across her planned path. It was almost perfectly camouflaged against the snow and rock, a professional touch. Not a local defense, but a high-level security measure. The architect knew someone might try to watch him. He was laying traps designed to hunt the hunter. A wave of profound determination washed over her. He thought he was untouchable. Lucy King was here to prove otherwise. She disengaged from the ridge, spending a precious hour rappelling down a dangerous, less-traveled face to bypass the wire and any potential secondary devices. The encounter heightened her sense of urgency and forced her to accelerate her timeline. She pushed herself harder, the lack of sleep and oxygen blurring the edges of her concentration, her mind fighting the physical brokenness of her body. When she finally reached the crow's nest, a tiny, wind-blasted cave, she was physically shattered but hyper-alert. The first thing she did wasn't rest. It was to spend 3 hours establishing her hide, digging a stable position for her rifle, burying her supplies, and setting up her primary and secondary fields of observation. Through her spotter scope, she confirmed the target. The architect's base was a sprawling, well-fortified compound tucked into a natural bowl in the valley below. It was sophisticated, organized, and bristled with advanced communications arrays. But more important than the compound was the man himself. On the third day of her watch, the architect appeared, stepping out of the main structure to observe a training drill. He was tall, powerfully built, and moved with a distinct, authoritarian confidence. Lucy spent hours documenting his movements, his security details, and his routines. She confirmed his identity through facial recognition software linked to her encrypted satellite uplink. The mission was now officially a go. But as she watched him, Lucy felt a strange, unsettling empathy for her enemy. He was brilliant. He was organized. He was teaching others to do exactly what she did, use the element of surprise and terrain advantage to eliminate high-value targets. The realization hit her. They were two sides of the same coin, masters of their craft, separated only by their moral allegiance. This intellectual understanding of her enemy introduced a subtle, emotional complication to the mission. It was a profound reflection on the nature of war itself. Two professionals, staring at each other across an impossible distance, preparing to execute a perfect, violent calculus. On the fifth day, her surveillance picked up a change in routine. A high-value convoy was approaching the compound. It was heavily guarded and included specialized transport vehicles. Through careful analysis of the convoy's movements and communication chatter she intercepted, Lucy realized the architect was not receiving supplies. He was leaving. The target was moving now, forcing a sudden, dramatic shift in her operational tempo. She felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with an intense, anxious determination. The window for a surgical strike was closing. She keyed the radio, transmitting the new intelligence to her task force command. For watch to command, architect is displacing. Convoy in transit, ETA 24 hours to a new, unknown location. Opportunity is now. Her voice was a steady stream of calculated data, requesting immediate confirmation for kinetic action. Target range 3.5 kilometers, conditions optimal. The time delay for command confirmation was agonizing. She watched the architect enter the main vehicle, surrounded by his security detail. Every second was an eternity. She was ready. The rifle was stable, the wind was perfect, the data was locked. She was anxious, determined, and utterly prepared to execute the kill shot. Command finally broke the silence. The answer was a flat, bureaucratic negative: Overwatch. Kinetic action not authorized. Priority remains confirmation of identity and relocation of network assets. Disengagement of convoy is the objective. Maintain Overwatch and report new location. The order hit Lucy like a physical blow. She felt profoundly ignored, her immediate tactical assessment overridden by the distant, slow calculus of policymakers who didn't understand the fleeting nature of this opportunity. The architect was getting away. She watched the convoy snake its way out of the bowl and disappear into the valleys. Her heart pounded with a mix of frustration and quiet fury. She had climbed an impossible mountain, fought through the solitude and the cold, placed herself in an impossible position, and now the kill shot was scrubbed. She felt the heavy, cold presence of command bureaucracy, the moral weight of their hesitation. But the architect was moving to an unknown location, which meant he was vulnerable on the road. The mission to observe was now over. The mission to protect was about to begin. Lucy King, the advanced guardian, had to adapt. She had to shift from overwatch to direct action, not against the architect himself, but against his network of security. She dismantled her hide and started the long, desperate descent down the sheer rock face, tracking the convoy's estimated vector. She had to move faster than they could drive, cutting through the high mountain passes to get ahead of them. She would intercept the architect's convoy in the desolate, narrow canyon known as the Devil's Tooth. It was a perfect choke point, a place where a single, small force could wreak havoc on a larger, armed element. She was closing the distance again, leaving the relative safety of extreme range to enter the terrifying, visceral world of close-quarters combat, alone, against a high-value target and a professional security team. She felt the return of her solitary strength, a grim resolve taking hold. The anonymity of distance was gone, replaced by the exposed, necessary determination to complete the mission, even if it meant breaking every protocol, including the one that had just denied her the shot. She was tired of being ignored. She was ready to act. Did the sheer drop of the Devil's Tooth offer sanctuary, or was it the final, narrow grave she had chosen for herself? The mountain descent was a blur of controlled falling, a desperate race against the clock and the limitations of the human body. Lucy moved not with grace, but with raw, broken desperation. Her legs screamed from the continuous, punishing impact. Her lungs fought for oxygen that simply wasn't there. She moved through the high-altitude twilight, following her GPS trace, pushing her body far past the physical point of exhaustion. She knew the convoy was moving along the valley floor, fast, professional, and oblivious. She had to use her mountain climbing skills to cut the distance, 3 days of driving for them, reduced to 18 hours of near-fatal vertical movement for her. This was the raw, undeniable reality of her commitment, sacrificing her own safety and health to rectify a strategic failure by command. She felt intensely broken, the physical cost of the mission etching itself onto her very bones, yet the core of her determination remained utterly unshakable. She reached the Devil's Tooth Canyon just before dawn, sliding the last 30 feet down an icy scree field. The location was perfect, a grim, geological trap. The canyon was a mile-long, winding stretch where the road was forced into a single, narrow lane, flanked by vertical granite walls that rose hundreds of feet. There was no escape and no cover for a convoy caught inside. Lucy's task was brutally simple: stop the lead vehicle, trap the rest, and then, in a terrifying inversion of her usual role, engage the overwhelming force at close range. The objective had shifted from surgical removal to total destruction of the architect's security detail, and potentially the neutralization of the target himself. Her first priority was weapon placement. She set up her main position high on the north wall, just above the mouth of the canyon, securing her Mk-13. The extreme-range rifle would be used here not for a single, clean shot, but for controlled, devastating suppression, punishing anyone who tried to organize or seek cover within the kill zone. The rest of her time was spent rigging the canyon floor with the few explosives she carried, 2 Claymore anti-personnel mines, and a handful of fragmentation grenades rigged as trip-and-pull devices. These were desperate tools, designed to create maximum chaos and confusion, not achieve perfect kills. The setup was quick, dirty, and utterly necessary to balance the odds against the 6 heavily armed vehicles she expected. As she worked, the solitude of the mountain, which usually felt like peace, turned into a vast, ominous silence. The previous day's decision by command, negative, kinetic action not authorized, still echoed in her mind, fueling a deep moral reflection. The failure to act is a morally worse choice than the action itself. She knew the clean, distant shot was morally simple, one action to save countless lives later. The close-quarters engagement she was preparing was morally complex, brutal, visceral, and messy. But the consequence of inaction, the architect escaping to set up more ambushes like Velka Ridge, was unacceptable. She chose the mess. She chose the fight. She chose the immediate, terrifying reality of personal sacrifice over the remote, comfortable morality of protocol. This was the core of the advanced Guardian doctrine she was training others to understand. Her inner conflict was palpable. The sniper in her demanded concealment and distance. The operative in her demanded commitment and proximity. She reconciled the two by becoming both. She left the Mk-13 on the high wall, setting the scene for an unseen strike, and moved down the canyon wall, rigging her M4 carbine with a suppressor and thermal optic. She would be moving, fighting, and targeting specific threats in a three-dimensional battle space. Her last act of preparation was to find a small, deep crevice near the canyon floor, a place where she could stage her ammunition, and where, if necessary, she could make a final stand. The hours of waiting were agonizing. The sun climbed high, baking the cold air, and the silence of the canyon was absolute. The anxious tension became almost physical, a vibrating hum beneath her skin. She had done everything humanly possible. Now it was down to instinct and physics. She lay perfectly still on her firing perch, the cold seeping through her thick clothing, the rifle barrel steady. This was the moment she felt the architect most keenly, not just as a target, but as a mind. She was convinced that the meticulous placement of the tripwire back on the high ridge wasn't random. It was a test. He knew an advanced operator would be tracking him. He was not just moving, he was luring. He was expecting a close-quarters intercept, betting on the professional security detail to eliminate the lone operative. The suspense intensified when the first, low rumble reached her ears. Not the wind, but the unmistakable sound of heavy diesel engines echoing off the rock faces. The convoy was here. Lucy focused her attention, every nerve ending screaming. She began a final, rapid mental checklist. Windage 0, elevation locked, primary mine detonator armed, secondary tripwires set. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the thin, cold air, letting go of the fatigue, the anxiety, and the brokenness. Only determination remained. The convoy appeared around the final bend. 6 vehicles, not 4 as expected. 3 heavily armored SUVs, 2 transport trucks, and, significantly, a technical truck bristling with a heavy machine gun, a calculated display of overwhelming force. The architect was in the middle SUV. The security detail was tight, professional, and scanning the high ground. They were not oblivious. Lucy realized the true nature of the trap. They weren't just driving. They were moving through a kill zone they expected to clear. The lead SUV drove directly over the spot she had chosen for her main explosive charge. The heavy machine gun on the technical was locked high, scanning the cliff faces. The tension became unbearable. She eased her finger onto the trigger of the Claymore detonator. This was the point of no return. The moral reflection was over. This was simply action. The convoy moved deeper into the Devil's Tooth, perfectly aligned, perfectly trapped. The second the lead vehicle passed the point of her primary charge, Lucy committed. She squeezed the detonator with a fierce, quiet resolve. The explosion was immense, deafening, amplified by the close granite walls. Shrapnel and rock shredded the lead SUV's chassis, immediately ripping the engine block and front axle apart, sending the vehicle grinding to an immediate, violent stop. The sudden roadblock trapped the rest of the convoy. Before the roar subsided, before the security detail could fully register the shock in the ambush, Lucy was already on her Mk-13, the rifle barked, and the heavy machine gunner on the technical snapped back, collapsing instantly. She worked the bolt and acquired the driver of the third SUV, the one closest to the exit, eliminating the final chance of escape. In the span of 6 seconds, the convoy was blind, trapped, and without its heaviest weapon. The battle for the Devil's Tooth had begun, and the lone operator was fighting downhill, determined to win. Did the sheer, ringing silence in her ears hide the sound of their command being issued, or was it the simple, terrifying sound of a plan successfully collapsing? The explosion was a physical fist to the air, immediately followed by the cracking thunder of the initial suppression fire. Lucy didn't wait to assess the smoke. She moved with the predatory swiftness of a shark smelling blood. Her job with the Mk-13 was done. 3 vital targets were eliminated in those first 6 seconds, the roadblock set, the heavy support silenced, and the escape cut off. Now she traded distance for proximity. Slinging the high-power rifle, she clipped the safety off her M4 carbine and began her tactical descent, rappelling down the sheer granite face toward the chaos below. This was the terrifying, necessary inversion of her identity, from the unseen guardian to the central, exposed point of the attack. Her training took over, a cold, perfect machine overriding the frantic beat of her human heart. The security detail was professional. Despite the shock, they reacted instantly, pouring out of the intact SUVs, taking up tight, defensible positions behind the chassis and the rock outcroppings. They weren't panicking, they were organizing. They knew they were in a kill zone and they knew they were facing a professional, but they assumed they were facing a team. Their return fire was initially spread, searching for multiple positions on the high ridge. Lucy smiled grimly to herself, her determination hardening. They were wasting precious ammunition on ghosts. The real threat was descending directly above them. She hit the canyon floor hard, rolling into a defensive position behind a jagged slab of granite she had noted earlier. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and explosives. Her inner conflict, the cold dread of close combat, was instantly replaced by the surgical focus of survival. She was outnumbered at least 10-1, maybe more, against heavily armed, motivated opponents. She had seconds to exploit the initial confusion. Her thermal optic cut through the smoke, highlighting the enemy bodies. 2 fighters were attempting to flank the ambush point, moving along the narrow northern wall, searching for the ambushers. They walked directly into her tripwire field. The fragmentation grenades detonated with dull, ripping sounds, localized and brutal. The flanking maneuver instantly dissolved into screams and twisted limbs. Lucy punished their lack of organization. She snapped her M4 up and dropped 2 men who had momentarily lifted their heads to locate the secondary explosions. Controlled pairs, center mass, head. Confirm the hit, acquire the next target. Her movements were economical, silent, and entirely rooted in the relentless training she had endured. She felt a profound sense of pride in the machine she had forged herself into. But the enemy began to adapt. One of the team leaders, a man with a distinct red armband, started barking orders in an unfamiliar, guttural language. The scattered fire immediately ceased, replaced by 2 concentrated bursts focused on the detonation points. They were narrowing the search. They knew the threat was singular and that it was now on the canyon floor. The fight became intimate and desperate. Rounds cracked against the granite slab Lucy was hiding behind, showering her with tiny, stinging chips of rock. She had to move, or she would be pinned. She dashed across a 7-meter gap, utilizing the confusion caused by the red-banded leader's rapid relocation of his men. As she ran, she squeezed off a short burst toward the muzzle flashes, not for a kill but for suppression. She reached her next defensive position, a tight corner in the canyon wall, and found herself face-to-face with a fighter who had been sent to secure the low ground. It was sudden, terrifying, and visceral. Lucy didn't hesitate. Her M4 spoke once, twice. The man dropped, his rifle clattering uselessly on the rocks. She felt a cold wave of fear for the suddenness of the encounter, but her determination to survive was absolute. She glanced toward the middle SUV, the one the architect was in. The door remained closed. No one was attempting to breach it or extract him. This detail chilled her more than the incoming fire. It suggested the architect was either terrified and paralyzed, Or more ominously, he was watching and waiting. He wasn't relying on his security team. He was using them to draw out the enemy. He had anticipated the close quarters intercept. The suspense surrounding his true intentions was now the most dangerous element of the fight. Lucy was running out of time and cover. The red-banded leader had pinpointed her general location and was leading a four-man element in a concerted push to bracket her. She was burning ammunition quickly, and the only way out was forward, deeper into the fight, toward the objective. She realized she couldn't win this as a static defender. She had to shatter their remaining organization, forcing them to scatter and break formation. This brought her to the final, most dangerous phase of her improvised plan, the assault on the intact vehicles. She emptied her last fragmentation grenade from its pouch, pulled the pin, and waited for the perfect moment during a brief lull in fire. The grenade sailed high, arcing over the trapped convoy and landing precisely under the fifth vehicle, a transport carrying the bulk of the remaining security force. The explosion was timed perfectly. The grenade didn't destroy the vehicle, but the shockwave and shrapnel ripped through the undercarriage, incapacitating several men inside and further disorganizing the outside security element. The red-banded leader screamed a final, desperate order. Seeing her chance, Lucy pushed out of cover. She fired on the move, emptying the remainder of her magazine into the advancing four-man element. 3 dropped instantly. The 4th stumbled, hit, trying desperately to seek cover. She was down to her final magazine and her position was completely compromised. The canyon walls echoed with the diminishing sounds of the fight. She was breathing hard, the exertion of the high-altitude combat threatening to overwhelm her, but she had broken them. The sheer, ruthless determination of a lone operative fighting against superior numbers had worked. Only 3 fighters remained visible outside the vehicles, and one of them was the red-banded leader, firing wildly. She moved directly toward the middle SUV, the only way to end the fight and complete the mission. She reloaded her carbine on the move, her hands working by pure instinct. She had to assume the architect was armed and waiting. She closed the final 20 meters, suppressing the remaining enemy detail with short, precise bursts, focusing on disabling them. She reached the middle SUV, her back pressed against the bulletproof plating, the silence around her now strained, terrifying. She felt the heavy, quiet moral weight of her proximity to the objective. It was time to find out if she had cornered a scared fox or a prepared snake. She raised her foot, kicked the rear door latch, and threw the door open with a brutal yank, her rifle trained on the interior. The SUV was empty. Why would he abandon his most secure asset and his professional guard? The chilling silence that followed the forced opening of the armored SUV's door was heavier than the preceding chaos of the firefight. Lucy stared into the empty cabin, her M4 trained on plush, undisturbed leather seats. The architect was gone. Not killed, not captured, but gone. It was a moment of profound, cold realization that eclipsed the physical exhaustion of the high-altitude combat. The ambush hadn't been defeated, it had been successfully concluded. The entire convoy, the 6 vehicles, the 20 professional fighters, the perfect trap of the Devil's Tooth Canyon, was nothing more than an elaborate, expendable decoy. Lucy felt an instant, crushing wave of being profoundly outsmarted. He hadn't just predicted an attack, he had anticipated her specifically. She quickly suppressed the sudden, fierce frustration. That was the point of his game, to provoke an emotional reaction to break her focus. She forced herself back into the cold, surgical detachment of the advanced Guardian. She was alive, the enemy security force was neutralized, and she was in control of the kill zone. Adaptation. She moved with brutal efficiency, clearing the remaining vehicles and securing the perimeter. The red-banded leader lay bleeding, conscious but incapacitated. Lucy ignored the impulse to simply eliminate the threat. She needed intelligence. She needed to know how he had vanished and where he was going. She moved to the injured man, securing his weapon and administering minimal first aid to stabilize the wound. This was not compassion. It was pure, cold, professional determination. She then returned to the empty SUV. She ran her gloved hands along the interior, searching for a false panel, a hidden compartment, or a breach in the armor. Nothing. The vehicle was spotless, professionally soundproofed, and completely intact. But then, tucked into a small, almost invisible recess in the center console, she found it. A small, sleek satellite communications device, powered on and flashing a coded, directional signal. It was not a phone or a typical radio. It was a high-frequency burst transmitter. This was the final, devastating punch of the architect's plan. As she analyzed the device, the mystery deepened. The signal was not a call for help. It was a burst of data transmitted just minutes before the convoy entered the canyon, and it was aimed at a single, extremely remote receiving station. Lucy plugged her encrypted tactical PDA into the device, bypassing the encryption just enough to read the coordinates of the receiver. The location was chilling. An ancient, abandoned communications relay station perched atop Mount Kafir, an even higher, more isolated peak, notorious for its denied airspace and hostile environment, some 50 kilometers deeper into the mountains. He hadn't run. He had moved to his true command center. The truth slammed into her. He hadn't escaped. He had relocated. The entire convoy was designed to draw her to the devil's tooth, confirming her presence, her capabilities, and her willingness to abandon protocol. The empty SUV was a deliberate taunt, a psychological weapon. He had known she would survive the ambush, find the empty vehicle, and then, driven by her core hope of protecting others, track the signal. He wanted her to follow. He had laid a trail, confident in his ability to anticipate her every move. The entire operation was a complex, multi-layered psychological trap set by a master of the hunt. Lucy felt the profound, chilling pressure of this realization. She was not the hunter, she was the hunted. But she also recognized the deep flaw in his hubris. The architect had assumed her motive was simple, revenge or capture. He hadn't accounted for her single, overriding moral reflection, her dedication to protecting the forces he aimed to destroy. His professional arrogance was his vulnerability. He wants me to come to him. She would give him what he wanted, but on her own terms. She spent the next hour meticulously clearing the kill zone. She disabled the engines of the remaining vehicles, recovered her Claymore detonator, and gathered all her remaining ammunition, redistributing the weight for the long, punishing march ahead. She again stabilized the surviving security detail. She wasn't saving their lives out of mercy. She was leaving them alive as a gesture of moral dominance, a silent message to the architect that his soldiers were expendable, but hers were not. Your plan failed, your men are safe, and I'm still coming. This act, performed under the intense pressure of imminent pursuit, was a powerful, silent demonstration of her silent resilience. She keyed her radio, transmitting a brief, coded message to command. Overwatch to command. Architect relocated to Mount Kafir relay. Convoy neutralized. Advancing to new position for kinetic action. No extraction requested at this time. She knew the message would cause immediate alarm. A solo operator unilaterally changing the mission profile to direct action against a high-value target in a denied area. But she couldn't afford to wait for bureaucracy to deny the kinetic shot again. Her sacrifice of anonymity at Velkar Ridge had granted her the necessary, terrifying authority to deviate from doctrine. The terrain to Mount Kafir was worse than anything she had faced. Higher, colder, and cut by treacherous, deep crevasses, the perfect terrain for a final defense. He had chosen it because it was a place where a lone operator would fail simply from the environment. Lucy knew she couldn't carry enough food or fuel to survive the predicted weather shift at that altitude for long. Her mission now was a timed run, reach the relay station, confirm the kill shot, and extract herself before the mountain itself killed her. It was a terrifying race to the peak, a solo act of sacrifice that was both personal and professional. As she began the ascent, climbing out of the canyon's deep shadow and back into the thin, sun-drenched silence, she reflected on the deep personal cost of her profession. She carried not just the weight of her gear and her mission, but the internal beat of every life she had saved and every life she had taken. The memory of her father was a quiet presence, pushing her forward. She was determined to eliminate this man, not just for the military, but for every family he would otherwise orphan. This was her personal redemption. The final stretch of the climb was an ice sheet, forcing her to abandon speed for survival. Her crampons bit into the blue ice. She moved steadily, one agonizing step after another. She was in an even deeper state of isolation than ever before, completely cut off from friendly forces, operating in the extreme limits of human endurance. The loneliness was profound, but now it felt less like peace and more like the fierce, necessary solitude of a final, essential task. She had embraced the role of the shadow wolf, and now she was closing on her prey's ultimate den. She reached the final ridge line just as the light began to fade, casting the peaks in a terrifying, bruised purple. Mount Kafir's summit lay before her, dominated by the hulking, abandoned metal structure of the radio relay station. There was light in the main building. He was here. He was waiting. Lucy found a small, sheltered position that offered an uncompromised line of sight to the building and began establishing her final, desperate hide. She only had enough energy for one final, perfect setup. She felt the heavy, quiet moral weight of the task ahead. This was more than a kill shot. This was the final, necessary act of protecting the innocent, a silent sermon spoken only by the perfect flight of a bullet. The next move was hers, and she knew exactly where she had to strike. The final game of psychological chess was about to begin. The architect was about to learn that while he was a master of the trap, she was a master of the hunt, and sometimes the best guardian is the one who charges into the darkness. Why did the air on Mount Kafir feel charged? Not with cold, but with anticipation. Lucy settled into her final hide, the thin air on Mount Kafir a bitter enemy against her exposed skin. The light was failing fast, and the jagged, snow-swept summit was dominated by the silent, ominous presence of the abandoned radio relay station. She had less than 4 hours before the temperature dropped into the lethal range, and the high-altitude winds became impossible to fight. This was the final, desperate act of Operation Watchman. The terrain itself was a trap, chosen by the architect because he knew her arrival would mean immediate, crushing fatigue and diminished capacity. He was relying on the mountain to do half his work. She quickly established her firing position, using her remaining snow camouflage and a small, tactical tarp to break up her outline against the rock. The Mk-13 was brought online, its scope immediately acquiring the faint, amber light glowing in the main building's window, 2,800 meters downrange. This distance was extreme, demanding absolute concentration and a perfect environment, conditions she did not have. The wind was gusting sporadically, and the thermal signature from her target was minimal. The emotional landscape of this moment was defined by her fierce determination and the profound, physical exhaustion that threatened to shatter her focus. She was running on pure will and the memory of her father. Her first task was intelligence. She brought her optics to bear, scanning the exterior of the relay station. The architect had not been idle. The station was defended. Lucy spotted 3 distinct, highly disciplined security posts, all using the building's heavy concrete foundations as cover. They were cold but professional, clearly waiting. This was not a simple hideout. It was a prepared defensive position designed to guard the final meeting point. The architect was not fleeing. He was hosting a rendezvous. The final layer of suspense was peeled back. This was a command center, and her intervention was now critically time-sensitive. She established a command and control uplink, a fragile high-gain connection back to command. She knew the protocol demanded she first call in the coordinates for an airstrike, but she also knew the window was closing, and any delay would allow the architect to escape the strike zone. She had to take the shot, a truth that carried a heavy, lonely moral weight. She felt the isolation keenly, the knowledge that her action would be irreversible, judged only by the outcome. As she watched, the architect appeared, stepping into the light of the main window. He was standing with two other men, high-value contacts who had clearly just arrived. They were clustered around a table covered in maps and electronic equipment, a command meeting in progress. This was her chance. 3 high-value targets in one frame, the perfect kinetic opportunity. Lucy felt a surge of professional pride. Her impossible journey, the pain of the climb, the brutal fight in the canyon, it had all led to this single, perfect moment. She began the long, agonizing process of calculating the shot. The elevation drop was immense, the air density negligible, and the wind, the treacherous, unpredictable wind, was shifting every few seconds, requiring rapid manual compensation. The sheer difficulty of the shot was terrifying. It required absolute stillness in a body that was shaking from cold and exhaustion. She adjusted the Mk-13, locking in her dope, compensating for every variable. She inhaled slowly, held it, finding the perfect, tiny moment of stillness, the natural respiratory pause, where the world stops just for the fraction of a second needed for the bullet to travel. Then the architect moved. He stepped away from the window, pulling the 2 contacts with him, and moved into the deeper shadows of the room. The target was gone, just like that. The window for the kill shot slammed shut, leaving Lucy with nothing but the echo of the lost opportunity and a cold, rising sense of failure. She was profoundly broken by the sudden, cruel shift of fate. She realized what had happened. He hadn't just moved. He had turned his head just before stepping into the shadows, a quick, almost imperceptible glance towards the high peaks. It was too fast for paranoia. It was too precise for luck. He hadn't seen her, but he knew she was there. This was the final, devastating move in his psychological game. He was confirming her presence, forcing her to move, demanding a final, close-quarters confrontation. The chilling truth was undeniable. The architect was challenging her, forcing her to abandon her hide, her rifle, and the safety of distance, and enter his fortified structure. He was willing to sacrifice a high-value meeting to draw her into a close-quarters trap. Lucy felt a surge of fierce, cold determination. She would not play his game, but she would end it. She knew the distance was too great and the conditions too poor for a sniper duel. The final act had to be direct. She quickly packed the Mk-13, leaving behind only the essential survival gear. She stripped down to her fighting order, shouldered her M4, and packed her remaining explosives and magazines. She was going to breach the station. The moral reflection was stark. Her duty was to neutralize the threat. The rifle had failed. Now only the knife and the close-quarters gunfight remained. She transmitted her final coded message to command. Overwatch going dark. Engaging target directly. Will attempt exfiltration after mission success. No response necessary. The descent toward the relay station was the most dangerous part of her journey. A controlled slide down an ice face, moving towards the sound of the enemy. She used the overwhelming noise of the high-altitude wind to mask her movements, moving from shadow to shadow, a single, silent predator closing the final 2,000 meters. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint light spilling from the windows of the station. She embraced the terrible solitude of the final assault, the knowledge that her failure meant not only her death but the success of her enemy. Her mission was everything. She moved, silent and determined, toward the final, close-quarters confrontation. Did the architect underestimate the quiet strength of the woman he thought he had lured into his trap? Lucy King moved through the shadows of Mount Kafir with a practiced, desperate silence, the M4 carbine held high, clearing corners. She had closed the final 2,000 meters in a terrifying, adrenaline-fueled sprint, relying on the high-altitude wind to mask the sound of her approach. She used a small, directional C4 charge to breach the main entrance door of the relay station, the muffled thump immediately followed by the sound of muffled shouts inside. The element of surprise was now spent. The fight was close, vicious, and personal. She had traded the clean, surgical violence of the sniper for the messy, visceral reality of a direct assault. She plunged into the darkness of the main server room, using the light spilling from the inner command center to orient herself. The room was a labyrinth of abandoned racks and dead equipment. Her thermal optics immediately picked up two heat signatures, two of the architect's security detail, attempting to flank her position. They were professionals, moving with controlled aggression. Lucy didn't engage with the thermal scope. She waited for them to move into the sliver of light from the doorway. And then, in a devastating burst, she dropped both with two precise, short bursts. She felt a profound wave of anxiety as the muzzle flash momentarily blinded her, but the determination to eliminate the threat was stronger than the fear. The silence that followed was broken by a single, sharp command in the guttural language she'd heard in the canyon, followed by the sound of a heavy door slamming shut deeper within the facility. The architect had sealed himself inside the command center. He wasn't running, he was waiting. He had lured her not just to the mountain, but to this final, fortified room, confident that he held the advantage. Lucy felt a grim sense of pride in realizing his game. He was going to force her into a final, close-quarters duel, neutralizing her sniper skills and exploiting her exhaustion. She moved quickly to the command room door. It was heavy, reinforced steel, designed to withstand a sustained blast. She quickly gathered her remaining explosives, a single fragmentation grenade and the rest of the C4. The moral reflection was simple: the threat must be neutralized. Protocol, collateral damage, and personal risk were irrelevant now. Her sole focus was the final, necessary act of sacrifice to ensure his network couldn't continue to threaten American forces. She wired the C4 charge to the door hinges and latch, setting the timer for 5 seconds. She took cover behind a massive, abandoned server rack, counting down the seconds, her ears ringing with the anticipation. The explosion was immense and contained, ripping the heavy door off its hinges and sending a wave of dust and debris into the room. Lucy didn't wait for the smoke to clear. She lunged through the ruined doorway, M4 raised, and cleared the room in a single, desperate rush. The command center was a small, high-tech sanctuary amidst the ruin of the relay station. The architect stood at the center, alone, unarmed, his hands resting on a central communications console. He was a powerfully built man, his eyes fixed on Lucy, a faint, condescending smile on his face. "The Guardian comes to me," he said, his English perfect, cold. "I knew you would. Your dedication to your teams is your flaw, Sergeant King. You are predictable." Lucy ignored the taunt, her M4 locked on his chest. "You're done," she stated, her voice clipped, barely a whisper from exhaustion. "Stand away from the console." "No," he said, his voice rising, filled with a sudden chilling hope. "This is my moment. I wanted to meet the woman who ruined Velkar Ridge. You forced me to adapt, and now I force you. I knew the moment you breached the door you would not shoot an unarmed man. It is the flaw in your moral code. It is what separates you from me." He was testing her ethical limits, the core conflict of her service. He knew she wouldn't shoot. He reached down and hit a single key on the console. A high-frequency satellite burst went out, immediately followed by the activation of multiple large-screen monitors on the wall. The screens lit up with tactical overlays of airbases, convoys, and patrol routes, the architect's entire network, transmitting real-time intelligence to his global client base. "Congratulations, Sergeant King," he said, spreading his hands. "You stopped a single man, but I have just released the data for 5 new ambushes across 3 continents. You came for me, but I have already won." He was waiting for her to break. Lucy felt the devastating weight of that moral choice. He was right. She could not pull the trigger on an unarmed man without losing the core of her integrity. But she also knew that if she hesitated, those 5 new ambushes would proceed. This was the final, brutal act of redemption. She forced herself to think not as a sniper, not as a soldier, but as a protector. Her duty was not to kill him, it was to stop him. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the small, chaotic detail he had missed. A flash drive, a removable memory stick, was plugged into a central processing unit on a side table, glowing faintly. That drive held the master key, the access to the control codes for his global network. In a move of blinding speed, Lucy dropped her M4. The architect smiled, victorious, his eyes locked on her weapon falling. But she didn't stop. She dove past him, her momentum taking her towards the side table. The architect roared, realizing his mistake, and lunged for her. He was powerful, and he grabbed her shoulder, spinning her violently. Lucy was too exhausted to fight, but she didn't need strength. All she needed was a second. She used the momentum of his grab to launch herself into the side table, sweeping her arm across, knocking the flash drive free of the CPU. As the drive tumbled, the architect tried to stop her, but Lucy already had her hand on the drive, her fingers closing around the small, crucial piece of plastic. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in, ready to fight for the drive. Lucy used her last remaining strength, twisting her body and driving the back of her head into his face. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. That was all she needed. She slammed the drive down on the concrete floor and brought the heel of her boot down with a single, vicious stomp. The drive shattered. The monitors on the wall went dark instantly. The satellite transmission ceased. The room was plunged into a strained, echoing silence. The entire network, the global planning, the 3 continents of terror, had been wiped out by a single act of silent resilience. The architect looked at the shattered plastic on the ground, then back at Lucy, a sudden, cold fury replacing the condescending smile. "You cannot be allowed to live," he whispered, reaching for a hidden blade in his boot. Lucy had already stepped back, her M4 retrieved, aimed at his center mass. She had saved the world, but the danger was not over. The man was still a threat. He lunged. The M4 spoke once, twice, 3 times. The global threat collapsed, silenced forever by the ultimate necessary violence. Lucy stood over the scene, her body shaking uncontrollably, the exhaustion and the cold finally catching up. She had no energy left. She had no way out. She had won, but the price was her own life on the high, frigid peak. She sent one final, simple burst message on her comms. "Overwatch. Mission complete. Exfil status, 0." She collapsed against the cold metal wall, closing her eyes, prepared for the cold embrace of the mountain. But then, a low, rhythmic thumping began, growing steadily louder. The sound of a helicopter. Her message had been received, and someone had chosen to ignore her final status report. She opened her eyes to the faint, growing light of dawn. The helicopter, a specialized high-altitude rescue bird, hovered over the relay station. A figure rappelled down Captain Hayes. He reached her, his face grim, professional. "Sergeant King," he said, securing her harness, "Colonel Holt told us your exfil status was negative." The colonel said, and I quote, "The guardian who walks into a storm deserves the chance to walk back out. Get up. We're going home." She looked at the ravaged command center, the shattered drive, the neutralized threat, and then at the sunrise breaking over the impossible peaks. She hadn't asked for recognition, but in that moment she realized she had earned something more valuable: respect. She had fulfilled her personal redemption. She had honored her father's memory by ensuring other soldiers made it home. She stood up on unsteady legs and allowed Hayes to guide her to the rope. Her job was done. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply walks out of the darkness and into the storm, and when the mission is complete, it is carried home on the collective hope of the people it saved.